Ethan Carter had always dreamed of owning a home where he could finally relax without interference. After years in the city, dealing with cramped apartments and endless noise, he moved to a peaceful suburban neighborhood. The house was perfect, spacious, quiet, and best of all, it came with a backyard pool. Even better, the previous owner had opted out of the local HOA, meaning Ethan was free from the typical micromanaging nightmares that came with those organizations. Or so he thought. Help us hit 10,000 subscribers. Tap subscribe and join the journey. The first sign of trouble arrived on a humid Monday morning. A sharp knock at the door interrupted Ethan's coffee ritual. Standing on his porch was an older man in a crisp suit, holding a clipboard with the kind of smug expression that only came from excessive authority. The man introduced himself as Gerald Whitmore, head of the neighborhood HOA. Without so much as a greeting, he handed Ethan an official-looking notice. This property is in violation of community guidelines. Your pool is unauthorized and must be drained immediately. Ethan frowned, glancing over the paper. I think you have the wrong house. I'm not in the HOA. Gerald smiled, the kind of smile one gives when they know something you don't. There have been some updates to the neighborhood bylaws. I suggest you read through them carefully. Ethan wasn't amused. I don't need to. I have legal documents stating my house isn't under HOA jurisdiction. He turned the paper over, scanning for any legitimate threats. So, I'll be keeping my pool. Gerald's smile never wavered. You may want to rethink that. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in his doorway, staring at the paper in his hand. He brushed it off, assuming it was a misunderstanding. Bureaucrats like Gerald thrived on control, but this was one battle Ethan wasn't going to entertain. The real problems started the next day. A second letter arrived, this one more aggressive. The fines had started, $100 per day until the pool was drained. Annoyed, Ethan ignored it. Then, by the following evening, someone had trespassed onto his property and chained the pool gate shut. That's when he realized this wasn't just a mix-up. It was war. Ethan was livid. The audacity of someone trespassing onto his property and chaining his pool gate shut wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct attack on his rights as a homeowner. He stormed over to his toolbox, grabbed a pair of bolt cutters, and snapped the chain off in one clean motion. If the HOA thought they could intimidate him, they had another thing coming. The next morning, his mailbox was stuffed with yet another letter from the HOA. This time, the fine had doubled, $200 per day. Not only that, but it contained a veiled threat. Failure to comply could result in legal action or even a lien on his home. Ethan clenched his jaw and tossed the letter aside. They had no authority over him. But the harassment didn't stop. A few days later, he walked outside to find a city utility truck parked in front of his house. A worker in a neon vest approached him with a clipboard. Sir, we received an HOA complaint about unauthorized water use. They claim your pool is violating water conservation laws. We've been instructed to shut off service until the matter is resolved. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. The worker shrugged apologetically. You'll have to take it up with the HOA. This was no longer just about fines and paperwork. The HOA was using every trick in the book to make his life miserable. Neighbors began watching him with wary expressions, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Others, however, whispered words of warning. An elderly man named Franklin Dupree, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, stopped Ethan during one of his morning walks. You're fighting a battle most of us gave up on years ago, Franklin said in a low voice. These people, they don't play fair. Ethan folded his arms. I'm not in their HOA. They have no legal right over my property. Franklin chuckled darkly. Son, legal has nothing to do with it. They'll twist the system however they need to. Ethan didn't want to believe it, but everything was pointing in that direction. The more he resisted, the more aggressive the HOA became. It wasn't just about his pool anymore. It was about control. And they weren't going to stop until he either gave in or fought back. Ethan knew he couldn't fight this battle blindly. The HOA was playing dirty, and if he wanted to win, he needed to understand exactly what he was up against. He spent the next evening digging through the paperwork he had received when purchasing the house. Somewhere in these documents had to be the proof that his home was legally exempt from HOA rules. As he was flipping through old contracts and legal clauses, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Rusty Anchor. You need to know what you're dealing with. At first, he considered ignoring it. This had to be some sort of trap. But his curiosity got the better of him. He recognized the bar's name. It was a small, rundown place on the edge of town. If someone had information, he needed to hear it. That night, he arrived at the bar and immediately spotted a woman sitting in a dark corner booth, swirling a glass of whiskey. She looked up as he approached, giving him a knowing smirk. "You must be Ethan," she said, motioning for him to sit. She introduced herself as Samantha Sam Hargrove, an ex-lawyer who had once fought the very same HOA, and lost everything. "I tried to take them down years ago," she explained. "They don't just bend the rules, they rewrite them whenever they want. You're not the first homeowner they've tried to force back under their control." Ethan leaned in. "They are using fines, shutting off my water, even trespassing. How the hell are they getting away with this?" Sam slid a thick folder across the table. "Because they have people on the inside, city inspectors, contractors, even local law enforcement. They forge documents, fabricate complaints, and manipulate records to force homeowners into compliance. It's all about power and money. The more people they control, the higher the HOA fees they collect." Ethan opened the folder, scanning pages of legal documents, forged signatures, and fraudulent amendments to the HOA's bylaws. He finally found what he was looking for: his home's original exemption clause. It was ironclad. Once opted out, the property shall not be subject to future board authority unless explicitly requested by the current owner. But there was a problem. According to the HOA's new records, Ethan's signature was already on a document agreeing to rejoin the HOA. A document he had never seen before. "They faked my signature," he muttered in disbelief. Sam nodded. "And if you don't expose them, they'll make sure it sticks." Ethan clenched his fists. The HOA wasn't just overstepping its authority, it was committing outright fraud. And if they were willing to forge legal documents to get what they wanted, there was no telling how far they would go. Now, it wasn't just about saving his pool. It was about bringing the entire corrupt HOA to its knees. Ethan barely slept that night. Knowing the HOA had gone as far as forging his signature meant they weren't just some overzealous neighborhood committee. They were operating like a full-blown criminal syndicate. And now that he had proof, he was sure they wouldn't just sit back and let him take them down. The retaliation began almost immediately. The next morning, he stepped outside to find his car missing from his driveway. Panic surged through him until he spotted a bright orange sticker on his mailbox. It was a towing notice. According to the HOA, his vehicle had been illegally parked on his own property. He stormed over to the impound lot, only to find out it would cost him $500 to get his car back. When he returned home, he discovered his mailbox had been ripped out of the ground. Bills, legal notices, and even his security camera footage USB drives were gone. He checked his home surveillance system, but somehow, the last 24 hours of footage had been erased. That night, as he sat on his porch, trying to figure out his next move, his phone rang. No caller ID. He hesitated before answering. A distorted voice crackled through the line. "You don't belong here, Carter. Drain the pool, sign the papers, or things will get worse." Before Ethan could respond, the call disconnected. That was when he heard the noise. A faint splashing from his backyard. Heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the pool. As the beam of light swept across the water, his stomach twisted. The water had turned a murky green, the stench of chemicals filling the air. Someone had dumped toxic substances into his pool, rendering it unusable. Fury burned through him. This wasn't about rules or fines anymore. This was personal. He stormed back into his house and called the police, but when the officer arrived, he barely looked at the damage before shrugging. "Sorry, sir. Without evidence, there's not much we can do. Maybe you should just work something out with the HOA." Ethan's blood boiled. The police were in on it too. That was the last straw. If the HOA thought they could bully him into submission, they had underestimated the wrong man. It was time to fight back. And this time, he was playing for keeps. Ethan wasn't going to take this lying down. If the HOA wanted a fight, he'd give them one, but not on their terms. He needed a plan, and he needed allies. That night, he met with Sam Hargrove and Franklin Dupree at his house. Sam was already drafting legal action, but Franklin had something even better: connections with other homeowners who despised the HOA just as much. "They've been running this neighborhood like a dictatorship for years," Franklin said, sipping his coffee. "Most folks are too scared to fight back. But if they see someone standing up, they might be willing to join the cause." Ethan grinned. "Then let's give them a reason to fight." The first step was gathering evidence. Ethan and Sam spent the next few days collecting testimonies from homeowners who had been harassed. They found dozens of cases of fraudulent fines, unauthorized liens, and even threats against families who had tried to resist the HOA. Franklin, meanwhile, rallied a small group of rebels, neighbors who were tired of being bullied but hadn't known how to fight back. They started sharing their stories on social media, creating a storm of outrage that quickly gained traction. Then Ethan went after the one thing the HOA valued most: money. With Sam's legal expertise, they found a critical flaw in the HOA's finances. There's a discrepancy in the HOA's expense reports, Sam explained. Funds are being allocated for neighborhood improvements that never actually happened. If we can prove financial fraud, the entire board could be removed. Ethan grinned. Then let's expose them. They sent the financial documents to a local news station, along with the testimonies and evidence of forged contracts. Within 48 hours, a whistleblower article went live, detailing how the HOA was extorting homeowners and illegally re-enrolling properties into their control. The response was explosive. City officials, who had previously turned a blind eye, were now under public pressure to launch an investigation. But Ethan knew the HOA wouldn't just roll over. If they were this corrupt, they weren't going to give up without a fight. And he was ready, because the next battle wasn't going to be fought in secret. It was going to be a full-blown war. The moment the expose went public, the HOA board scrambled into damage control. Gerald Whitmore, the smug-faced leader of the HOA, released a statement dismissing the accusations as baseless attacks from a disgruntled homeowner. He tried to spin the story, claiming Ethan was the real troublemaker, someone who refused to follow community standards. But the cracks in their foundation were already showing. The very next morning, Ethan woke up to find a formal eviction notice taped to his front door. According to the document, he was in severe violation of HOA regulations, and they were pursuing legal action to seize his home. They were trying to steal his house. Ethan didn't even feel fear, just pure rage. He stormed into his living room, where Sam and Franklin were already going through more documents. "This is it," Ethan growled, slamming the notice onto the table. "They just declared war." Sam grinned. "Good, because we're about to hit them where it hurts." The following day, the court case began. The HOA, backed by their team of overpriced lawyers, strutted into the courtroom, confident they would crush Ethan under legal technicalities. Gerald took the stand first, smirking as he rattled off a scripted testimony about how Ethan was a public nuisance and a threat to the integrity of the neighborhood. He waved around the supposed contract where Ethan had voluntarily rejoined the HOA. Then Sam took the floor. With absolute precision, she tore their case apart. She presented the forged contract, showing the mismatched handwriting and obvious digital manipulation. She cross-examined Gerald, trapping him in contradictions until his smug demeanor vanished. Then came the final blow. Franklin, who had once been one of the original founders of the HOA, took the stand. "I was here when we first built this community," Franklin said, his voice firm. "And I know exactly how this HOA twisted into the corrupt mess it is today." He pulled out a secret ledger, one he had kept hidden for years. This document contains evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property takeovers. Gerald Whitmore and the current board have been stealing money from homeowners and forging legal documents to force people back into the HOA. The courtroom erupted. Gerald's face turned ghostly pale. His lawyers frantically whispered among themselves, but it was too late. The judge immediately halted all HOA actions against Ethan and ordered a full criminal investigation into the board. By the end of the week, Gerald and several other board members were arrested for fraud, harassment, and falsifying legal documents. The HOA was officially dissolved. And just like that, the tyrannical rule over the neighborhood was over. The fallout from the HOA's exposure was swift and brutal. The city launched an official investigation, uncovering years of financial fraud, forged documents, and illegal intimidation tactics. The local news station ran a follow-up story, highlighting the homeowners who had suffered under the HOA's rule. Public outrage exploded, and pressure mounted on city officials to take immediate action. Within a week, Gerald Whitmore and the entire HOA board were forced to step down. But the real victory came in court. Thanks to Sam's airtight legal case and Franklin's insider knowledge, the judge ruled that the HOA had been operating illegally for years. Not only were their fraudulent fines and liens declared void, but they were ordered to repay thousands of dollars to homeowners they had extorted. The biggest blow came when Ethan's case proved that the HOA had forged homeowner signatures to re-enroll properties. With the evidence exposed, the court ruled that the HOA had no legal authority over Ethan's home, or any other home that had previously opted out. The result: the HOA was permanently dissolved. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was free. Ethan celebrated the victory the only way he knew how, by throwing a massive pool party. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to resist now laughed, splashed, and toasted to their newfound freedom. Franklin, sitting in a lounge chair, chuckled as he watched kids dive into the now crystal-clear pool. "I haven't seen this place so alive in years," he mused. Sam, sipping a drink by the edge of the pool, smirked. And no one even had to pay a pool usage fine. Ethan leaned back in his chair, finally at peace. He had won. But just as he was about to take a sip of his drink, his phone buzzed with a notification. A new email from an unfamiliar sender. Subject: New Community Management Proposal, HOA Restoration Plan. Ethan burst out laughing. They never learned. But this time, he was more than ready for them.